Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With us today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
How are you this morning, Dr. Paul?
Doing fine, thank you.
Good.
Ready to go to work?
Yes, indeed.
Bring about truth to the world.
We'll try.
But anyway, that's a job and a half. There's a lot of misinformation out there, but there's some interesting things going on. I want to talk about our famous president. He had a press conference or made a statement yesterday, and there was a lot of discussion about that. One discussion I heard on regular television was, it wasn't only radical right-wing Republicans that brought it up, but others, more mainstream people, was bringing up, how's he doing? Why don't they ask him? Why don't they ask the press people or Biden? Of course, there's no live press conference. How's Biden doing? Implying that he might have a problem. But anyway, the subject was interesting to us because he wanted to talk about guns and all the problems that we face. But he brought up the subject of F-15s and nuclear weapons and confronting insurrections. And it seems to me, and to some others, that he was undermining his position on insurrections. And here he was talking about F-15s and nuclear weapons would be necessary, but none of that existed, and yet he was using those terms. Was he using the term in order so that they can use these big weapons anytime they want and threatening people, or just what? And I think that might have been the issue that confused a lot of people, because it sort of opened up the door for the people who don't like him, the Republicans, to sort of make fun of this whole thing, that he was setting the stage for, undermining his contention that the Republicans, and January 6th is a big deal. They're hanging on to this to really hurt the Republicans, and I think it's going to flop just like the Russian scandal flopped. Eventually, the most people in this country, they don't even think about that anymore, and they don't believe all the garbage they have. But this now makes people, it should make people reassess their interpretation, of January 6th. And but he did have a few confusing statements that he made there that should be something that everybody should be concerned about.
Yeah, he did step into it, and I think without realizing it, he completely undermined the entire narrative for January 6th, which, as he said, was the worst threat to our democracy since the Civil War. Let's listen to what he said yesterday. It's about 30 seconds long. If you can get through it, let's listen to what he had to say. If you can cue up that video,
The Second Amendment, from the day it was passed, limited the type of people who could own a gun and what type of weapon you could own. You couldn't buy a cannon. Those who say the blood of patriots, and all this stuff about how we're going to have to move against the government. Well, the tree of liberty is not water with the blood of patriots. What's happened is that there never been, if you wanted to think you need to have weapons to take on the government, you need F-15s and maybe some nuclear weapons. The point is that there's always been the ability to rationally limit the type of weapon that can be owned and who can own it.
As usual, he flubbed his lines quite a bit. Well, what he meant to say is, come on, gun owners, what's wrong with you? You think that with just your guns, you're going to overthrow the federal government? You need F-15s and nuclear weapons. Well, that's suspicious, because nobody on January 6th had a gun. So how at the same time could they have been on the verge of overthrowing the government?
And one thing they skirt around is that complaints about government and changing government is only done by weapons. And of course, I have at least pointed out quite frequently that it wasn't an armed insurrection that really closed down the Soviet system.
Yeah.
And ideas are very important. So yes, he's mixing this up mainly because his goal, and the goal of the radical left, is to make sure that people don't have guns to defend themselves against the government. Now that's, just you're not allowed to say that, but that was the reason they passed the Second Amendment. They were frightened about the tyranny of government. Even though I guess a lot of people wouldn't agree with that, that's really the reason there is a Second Amendment. But I don't think he helped straighten out the understanding of what the Second Amendment is all about, nor did he explain exactly when you have an insurrection or you don't have an insurrection. And it's all about weaponry, where I think it's so much more important that ideas are the driving force. And I think one place somebody mentioned the whole fact that what about for 20 years the people with the big guns, the Americans and others in NATO, was never able to conquer Afghanistan.
Yeah.
But they haven't been able to. Nobody's conquered Afghanistan for centuries, so it's more than just weaponry. But this whole thing, I don't think. Maybe this is a type of he wants his cake and eat it too. He wants to attack the weapons, and he wants to continue to condemn all Trump supporters. Or if you question it, you're a Trump supporter. Therefore, you are committing treason, practically.
Yeah. Well, there were some factually incorrect statements that parts of his statement, objectively factually incorrect, and we can put up that first clip. And this has been noticed by people on the left and the right. This happens to be a right-wing tweet guy, Jack Posobiec. When Biden says the Second Amendment from the day it was passed limited the type of people who could own a gun and what type of weapon you could own. You couldn't buy a cannon. And of course, Posobiec points out it has been legal to own a cannon since the founding of the United States. Privateers used them during the Revolutionary War, and cannons are legal under the NFA. And he actually, underneath this, posted another tweet from the actual ATF where it said, yeah, you can own guns. You can own cannons.
Now that that's out there, and we know that cannons are legal, that might be a big boost for the cannon business.
It would look nice in your front yard, actually. A couple of those.
But now they've limited to the equivalent of a cannon would be an automatic weapon.
Yeah.
In case 10 people come barging into your house, an automatic weapon might be necessary.
Better than a cannon.
So that's a real tragedy. But I think the winners of all these battles and fights throughout all history is the group that has the highest moral ground are the people whose homeland is being challenged. And I think that's why, the people in Afghanistan have been able to survive all the weaponry that has been thrown at them. It's the people who don't justify get into so much trouble. What about the example of Vietnam? I often thought about that. How did they do so well, and how many bombs did we drop? I think history shows that we probably dropped more bombs on Vietnam than we did in World War II. It was unbelievable, but it didn't solve the problem because people don't like their homeland attacked, and eventually the American people aren't going to like their land attacked, whether it's by foreign sources. But right now, people are starting by these rallies at the town hall meetings and all. People are starting to realize that the enemy may be domestic, and they're looking at the people who are challenging us with all this nonsense with cultural Marxism marching on. I think they're starting to realize that there is an enemy within. Of course, that 25 years ago, boy, that sealed your fate to think that there could be an enemy within, and yet they were there then too.
Yeah.
But they're just becoming more powerful and more noticeable, and that's really been the argument recently.
The other context of what Biden said, there was an explicit threat, really, to use F-15s and nuclear weapons against American people. He said, "Hey, we've got these and we'll use them," and that's pretty chilling when you think about that the U.S. military being used against Americans. But even on the progressive side, and we know Glenn Greenwald is a great, honest progressive, and he takes a lot of flack from the left for being an honest one. He had a great tweet. Let's put this one up and have a look at this one. He comments on another tweet by Drew Holden. Both of these can't be true. You can't say that you need F-15s to take on the government and say that democracy is under unprecedented assault from unarmed people. And Greenwald writes precisely, Biden's mockery of the citizenry, you think you can threaten the U.S. government with guns, you need F-15s and nukes for that, shows how moronic is a depiction of a few hundred MAGA protesters as a threat to the stability of history's most militarized and armed government. Good point. Here's a couple other quick good points. Let's look at the next one. This is Tim Young, who I don't know but makes a good point. Biden, the greatest threat to America in modern history was the unarmed people wandering around the Capitol on January 6th. Also Biden, in case you don't like the government, we have nukes and F-15s. And I'll leave the last clip on this to the Babylon Bee, which is somehow their satire is so close to reality that it's sometimes it's too funny, sometimes it's hardly funny. Let's put up this last one. The Babylon Bee is a satire site. It shows Biden, "You'll never beat the government with just guns," says the party that also believes the government was almost toppled by an unarmed mob on January 6th. So leave it to them to put some humor in the whole thing.
Well, you know, this threat that you mentioned, that it sounds like they'd use these weapons against the American people. But, you know, in a way, we're moving in that direction. I mean, it's happened. And they're setting the stage because they throw around the word terrorist.
Yeah,
you know,
domestic terrorist. Yeah,
I'm sure there was a bunch of domestic terrorists, you know, on January 6th. You know, and they're just setting the stage. But the government's been pretty violent with the American people. Even the people who are being charged, they just cast out the Constitution completely.
Yeah,
and we talk about this quite often now. They're in prison.
Yeah.
Without any due process. And what about American citizens being assassinated by the American government?
Yeah.
You know, and that's not by right-wing extremists. It's not done by the Trump people. That happened to be under Obama's presidency that they were doing that. So it's a bad situation, and then you don't get much clarity from a speech that we heard yesterday about supposed to clarify his position and promote, get rid of gun ownership, private gun ownership, and yet it may serve a purpose. This may just wake up some people, just like some of these incidents was cultural Marxism. People are waking up in the school system. Just think how many people are starting to wake up on what's going on in our government schools.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah, that is
They're
good.
waking up.
But you talk about how these people have been treated from January 6th, and once again, Julie Kelly does great work. She has looked into what's happening to these people, and we highlighted this grandmother who faced a stiff sentence for what she did. What happens is a lot of these people are not wealthy people, and they have to rely on public defenders. This particular, she's a 49-year-old grandmother of 5. She has a public defender who sent her a bunch of books that she had to read, lecturing her about white privilege and racism and the racist history of the U.S. So what she did, she went before the judge and said, "I read all these books. I'm sorry for my white privilege and for my racism." It really is something out of Mao Zedong's China, where she was forced to do, or even in a Stalinist recantation. So yes, these people are treated extraordinarily badly for non-violent crimes. Very serious.
Yep, it's going on, and hopefully we all wake up to it and motivate people. And I think we are moving in that direction. Do we want to move on to one more item here that we have? And the CDC director says it's now entirely preventable to never see COVID again. And she brags about, you know, what the results will be, down to near zero, 100% guarantee that they will never get anything, which isn't true at all. You know, the vaccine has a lot of question. But the interesting thing is, the most she can hope for, especially with the children, the most she's talking about children, you know, getting this and preventing them from ever getting it. But if you don't do anything, they have the same statistical benefits.
Yeah.
But if you get the vaccine, you're guaranteed, she guarantees that they're not going to get COVID, which is...
or die from COVID, yeah.
But maybe... could it be that the vaccine could be more dangerous than not taking it? You know, it's going to be dangerous, just as bad as if they've gotten a disease. It's just nothing more than propaganda. And did you see where, you know, the day they opened up and said the kids should get it? How many tens of thousands of people got it in 1 week?
Yeah.
What an organization, you know, for them to do that. It goes well when you're selling that stuff and you make money and you don't even have to charge the patient.
Yeah, and this is so deceptive because it's even using good news, like there's no reason for anyone now to die of COVID-19. That sounds like great news, especially if we've talked about new studies about ivermectin and other things, treatments of the disease, maybe behind that. But that's not really what she means. She means if you take this shot, then there's no reason that anyone will die from COVID-19. And that's a little bit different. She's using it as a propaganda tool. And what she and Fauci are both doing, they've both been in front of the cameras now scaring up this Delta variant. Remember, we talked about it yesterday. We showed The Guardian saying, well, the problem with this Delta variant is it's so mild, people don't realize that they have it. So other people have said it's called the seasonal cold, it's called hay fever, it's called the flu. But the CNN article is pumping up the Delta variant. We've seen this movie before where we're told a huge threat is coming, and we could be wrong, it could be something different, but everything we've seen, including the statistics, and Dan Horowitz over at The Blaze does a great job of crunching the numbers on this so-called Delta variant. And what they're talking about are projections based on their projecting models, which have been unbelievably wrong in this past year or so. So it's a scare tactic, but the whole thing is still the same. You better get that shot, even if, as you say, statistically, and it's objectively true, statistically young people do not suffer, and even the WHO says this, do not suffer severe illness from this, so you have to balance the danger of the shot with the danger of getting very sick from COVID.
I think during this pandemic, or whatever you want to call it, has called attention to, for a lot of people, natural immunity. I think people, I bet there's more people taking zinc and vitamin D and doing things. And yet the study I would like to see is some group that never got near a doctor, not that I disapprove of the doctor, but stayed away from all this modern medicine which Fauci promoted, versus a community that really worked hard over the years, because the natural immunity has been known for a long time. We just think if the energy and the money and the activity that went into the vaccination and all this regulation had been used to really promote education. And that would be, of course, if you want an honest education, you'd have to get the government out of it. You'd have to get the drug companies out of it. You'd have to get the Faucis of the world out of it. So I see this as a lot of malinvestment. There's a lot of money's gone into this, billions and billions of dollars, a lot of complications that we still haven't heard about. At the same time, the other part, if it had been more natural, maybe more people would have spent more money studying natural remedies and natural protection. And but I bet there may be a study out there that's really crystal clear. These people used everything they knew about on natural remedies. There were doctors who practiced medicine that way, but they so often were getting into trouble and saying, this is what you need to do, A, B, C, and you don't need to be running off and putting on a filthy mask, this sort of thing, and giving it to kids. That should wake up the people. The statistics are so powerful. And then if you want to say, well, what harm did the government do by this? Well, just go to the nursing homes. Where they pushed it, it did tremendous damage. And then I think it impedes, when you concentrate on that, you don't have as much incentive for the natural approach to develop.
Well, we know for a fact that, among other things, obesity and diabetes were huge factors in mortality for COVID-19. That's in all the statistics. Those two are mostly, with rare exceptions, preventable. Certainly obesity is preventable with a natural lifestyle, but what does the government do? They promote all the bad foods. They've spent 30 years promoting eating carbs, giving everyone diabetes. But let's move on to this next, because it's related to what we're saying, because we're talking about the issue of risk in young people. And this is something, the new numbers came out on adverse reactions to the shot. And look at this. CDC finds more cases of heart inflammation than expected in vaccinated young males. More than 1,200 cases of heart inflammation in adolescents and young adults following Pfizer or Moderna's vaccine have been reported to health authorities in the United States, the CDC said on June 23rd. So these are the CDC's own numbers. They were shocked, they were upset to find that there are so many, and as we've talked about, and everyone else has talked about, the reporting is very, very low percentage-wise to the actual occurrence of these problems.
And they're still in an age group which they're very unlikely to get it and very unlikely to die from it, and yet they're pushing on there. Now you're starting to see the complication, and I'm convinced that these complications are going to be long term, especially when it gets near a heart, because people have died. We died from this disease and the reaction of the heart. But it sort of makes me think about rheumatic fever because it's a different. Rheumatic fever was a bacteria that damaged the heart and had heart valves. So I don't think they know what kind of a damage, how many people had mild cases, and maybe people who had rheumatic fever might have had a case when they were a kid and the heart valve damage didn't really give them trouble. Today, fortunately, they can replace valves, but it might have taken 10, 20, 30 years.
Wow.
There'd be a residual for this. So this is the whole thing is so unnecessary. How risky was it for them not to have it? And of course, it was to say there's no risk in taking it because it's so low in percentages, and that's the way they talk people into it. But it's just public health. Public health is, it sounds very good, but I think if everybody took care of their personal health and watched they didn't get diabetes and a few other things, yes, that's public too. But the public health they're talking about is following the rules, obeying, put on your mask, social distancing, and lockdown, and that kind of thing, which has, I think when the dust settles, people are going to say none of that helped. I'm sure there's quite a few people have already come to that conclusion. That that doesn't mean that there aren't medical reasons for doing some of that, even quarantines and using masks and things, because we know that can be important when people are very ill in a hospital. Doctors wear masks all the time. It isn't that they're against masks, they're against this universal use of masks for reasons they don't even know why they're doing it, and then it ends up doing more harm than good.
Yeah. Well, I hadn't realized until we talked a little bit before the show how serious this myocarditis was. I was thinking probably a lot of people were thinking too, like maybe it's like a hematoma, you get a little bit of discomfort, whatever, you get a little problem, but I hadn't realized until you explained it to me that it can actually be pretty serious, cause serious problems.
And it's going to be a long time before they have everything worked out on that. So least is best first. Do no harm.
Yeah. Do no harm.
That sometimes, and when I was practicing medicine, a lot of times it's the patient's been conditioned for that. They would come in, and parents want to protect their kids and all. They would come in, and they would have a sore throat, and I would be convinced, do a test, that they didn't have a bacterial infection and they didn't need penicillin, but they've been so conditioned. I need a shot of penicillin, and in some ways, the patient puts a lot of pressure on the doctor, and to sit down and give them a lesson would take 30 minutes. Then they wouldn't be converted, and then they'll probably change doctors, and it puts a lot of pressure on the doctor, and they end up giving them a shot. Give them a shot. That's what they want.
And now we have antibiotic resistance in this society.
Yeah, boy, that's for sure.
Well, do we want to look at this next little thing? Because this we noticed this, and it was disturbing. And let's put up that next clip about the 13-year-old. And it made a huge buzz on Twitter yesterday. We have not investigated, but she held up the vaccination card for a 13-year-old son. She said, "My brother's 13-year-old son had his second COVID shot. Less than 3 days later, he died. The initial autopsy results were that his heart was enlarged and there was some fluid surrounding it. He had no known health problems and was on no medications." So that is possibly an example of a real adverse reaction.
Yeah, and that gets the attention, and their argument will be, yeah, but if he didn't have the shot, he might have gotten the disease and gotten a complication. People die from it. But not the 13-year-olds.
Yeah.
The 13-year-olds are very, very unlikely.
Resilient.
I wonder how many people, say under 18, have gotten the virus and got deathly ill with it. There's not very many. But when the government got involved in the nursing homes, you know what happened.
Yeah, they got rid of them. Well, I'm pretty much out of stuff. I was going to do well, you had something here that you
I
wanted.
had one little
yeah,
one.
Yeah.
One little one. This came from Armstrong. And he must be a dog lover or animal lover, because he was taking his dogs to his veterinarian. But all of a sudden the condition has changed with all this virus, that he was never allowed to go in. He was never allowed to pick up his dog and go in and take the dog inside. They made him park, and he said this is more than just one veterinarian. They made him park in the parking lot, call in, get a number, and describe where he is, and then they indeed would come out and pick up the dog and take it in and treat it. But and the reason they gave is they were very frightened. The people who worked in there, they were frightened about the getting COVID. So you know, it's so much intimidation and fear mongering, but that is what they needed in order to get submission. And it's submission that has been the big deal. I think the people who have been very much involved in this type of planning, I think even though they've had to back off now, the evidence is overwhelming, I think they would feel pretty proud of themselves.
Yeah.
Boy, I never dreamed we could do this, and it could go worldwide, and we could intimidate them and scare the living daylights out of them.
Yeah.
And now, like you've already mentioned, there's another virus on the way.
Yeah.
So this is something we better be alert to. And once again, people better look out for that passport stuff, because that'll be the big leap. But they have this in between. At one time, it was just going to be Bill Gates's injection, and it would be implanted. But now it's the intimidation. It's you can't live, you can't get your job, and you can't play ball if you don't have your passport. And right now, you just think of what they're doing with the Olympics in Japan.
Yeah,
if you don't
crazy.
have this proof, and it's disgusting.
It is disgusting. Well, I'm gonna close with a sort of a modest proposal. This is something else from Glenn Greenwald tweeted, and I'm interested in the media as a concept. Let's put up this next one, if we can. This is Glenn Greenwald. It's hard to put into words how completely the audience for both MSNBC and CNN have collapsed. An unprecedented failure. Chris Hayes is on the verge of having fewer than 100,000 people watching under 55. Humiliating numbers for a YouTuber. Same with Joy Reid and Lawrence. And go to the next one, actually. This is Glenn putting up the numbers. Even I feel pity looking at the numbers for MSNBC's weekend hosts. They have between 25,000 and 60,000 people watching under 55. The whole tactic was scaring people about the big orange Hitler. With him gone, so are their whole audience. And I was just wondering, Dr. Paul, if they're only getting about 25,000 people with this big studio and all these fancy staffs, we're not getting too much less than that with our show, so maybe we should sit by the phone and see if they want to call us up and have us.
I guess they would have to concede that we have been effective with a lot less money.
A lot less money.
So I think the money sometimes can be a negative, because people become complacent, and it doesn't depend on the quality. And we brag about our viewers, because I believe we really do have high quality people that are interested. We have had a reflection of a little conference we were going to have, and we found out that we underestimated the interest in what we were doing.
We sure did. It's over to you, Dr. Paul.
I want to thank our viewers once again for being with us today, and we will continue to work on our effort to bring you as much information and sort it out as possible. And it's always going to be necessary, because that's the nature of government. And there are days when I sit back and think, well, how are we going to reform government? People come up and say, should I run for Congress? We need more people in Congress. I don't discourage people from doing that. I think I know somebody that did that. But the point, the point is is that that in itself will not be enough. You just can't expect the government to change, and yet that is it. So if anything, over the years, most of the time people, when they go to Washington, they become more part of the system. They learn how the system works, raise money, get reelected, move up in the ladder, do good, get a chairmanship, and you're going to do so much good for your constituency. Well, I just don't think that it works that way. I think that people have to really change their minds about things, and that if you can do it in different ways, everybody has a job. I think the most important thing that I assume for myself is try to understand things the best I can, which means I feel like I am constantly a student and somebody seeking information and seeking out sources, and we quote our sources, that we give them more credit and thinking that they're close to our viewpoint and they want to do, like an honest journalist. We get excited about an honest journalist, and yet there was a day when most journalists were a lot more honest than they are today. And then the other thing, about getting an honest politician, there's a couple up there, handful or so, but I tell you what, that whole system has deteriorated. So I think it's really by individuals preparing themselves and then spreading a message, and the message has to be crystal clear, because I do believe very sincerely that ideas have consequences, and ideas whose time have come, you can't stop them. Even the armies can't do it, and even Biden's threatening with his F-15s and nuclear weapons. He's not going to stop the people who are saying enough is enough. We need more people going to the school board meetings and town hall meetings, because yes, small numbers, people who have ideas can be leaders, but ultimately the people have to rally. The government we have is a reflection of the sentiments of the people. So overall, the sentiments of the people have been amazingly supportive, unfortunately, for cultural Marxism. That's what we're contending with. But I think that's starting to break. I really believe we can stop that, because the attitudes of the people will be a reflection of the leaders of the country. So if people want to do something, figure out something to do. And it's going to be different for every single person. It might be making one phone call a day and trying to get people to look at certain things and understand things from a certain perspective. And principles, really, if they're really on the right track, they're not that complicated. The principles that I follow, and most libertarians do, is no violence. You can't commit violence against anybody, and tolerate other people if they're not hurting people. Tolerate their own personal habits. I don't think the rules are a lot more complicated, but the nonviolence is amazingly important and not complicated. And most people, the experience I had in a couple years of running national campaigns, I was so impressed with the student people that did come out. I know there were a lot more that didn't come out, but we had large crowds come out, would really welcome the answers to how and what you have to do and why nonviolence is a good way to go for the benefit of everybody. And it certainly is a benefit if you want to promote peace and prosperity. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.